The first sound wasn't a warning. It didn't arrive with sirens or alarms or the cold precision of a system failure. There was no rising tone, no flashing light to prepare the mind for danger. The Galactic Council chamber, an ancient arena of power suspended in the vacuum above the Orion Nexus, remained exactly as it had been seconds before. Vast, luminous, and suffocatingly controlled. Then it came, a laugh. Human. Sharp enough to cut through layered atmospheres. Real enough to bypass translation filters. It didn't echo like sound should in a chamber engineered to absorb conflict. It pierced, threading through alien acoustics and synthetic silence alike. Not loud, not prolonged, just one brief, unmistakable release of something dangerously close to amusement. For a fraction of a second, no one moved, because the chamber did not understand what it had heard. Thousands of species were present. Beings who communicated through pheromones, through electromagnetic pulses, through shared neural fields and gravitational resonance. Emotion, for most, was regulated, suppressed, weaponized only when necessary. Even anger had structure here. Even fear followed protocol. But laughter? Uncontrolled, unrequested, untranslated, it didn't belong. The sound lingered longer than physics allowed. Not in the air, but in perception. In the quiet spaces between thought and reaction, as if the chamber itself was trying to decide whether to acknowledge it or reject it. High above the central floor, the Council's tactical displays shimmered. Vast holographic projections of star systems, fleet positions, territorial boundaries mapped across light years of contested space. For centuries, those stars had been constants, anchors of calculation. Every flicker, every movement, every gravitational signature monitored, predicted, understood. Until now. Because at the exact moment that laugh reached its end, the stars flickered. Not dimmed, not shut down. They flickered like something had passed in front of them. Across every display, constellations wavered. For a heartbeat, entire sectors of mapped space blurred. Not erased, but obscured. As if reality itself had lost focus, sensors struggled to compensate, recalibrating faster than any organic mind could follow. Light lagged. Data streams fractured. And then, just as suddenly, everything returned. Perfect, stable, measurable, but not trusted. Deep within the chamber's layered systems, something ancient stirred. Not a program, not a defense protocol, but a recognition buried in code written by civilizations long extinct. A silent flag triggered across subsystems that had not activated in millennia. Unidentified anomaly. Source behavioral. Eyes turned, hundreds, thousands, some visible, some not. Some biological, others projected through light and signal, all of them searching for the origin of a sound that had done something no weapon, no fleet, no empire ever had. It had disrupted certainty. At the center of the chamber, beneath the towering verdict sphere, stood the only being capable of making that sound. Still, unarmed, human, and for the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, the universe itself seemed to hesitate as if waiting to understand why. The Galactic Council spire was not built. It was assembled from consequences. Floating above the Orion Nexus like a wound that refused to heal, the structure stretched across orbital darkness in impossible layers of architecture, rings within rings, platforms suspended by gravitational folds, and translucent corridors that bent light instead of reflecting it. Entire civilizations had contributed to its construction over millennia, not out of unity but necessity. Because long ago the galaxy learned a simple truth. Without a shared place to argue, everything else became war. Inside the air was not air in any natural sense. It was a curated medium, engineered for stability across thousands of biological systems. Temperature, pressure, even scent profiles were continuously rewritten by unseen environmental cores embedded within the spire's bones. What one species called breathable, another called poison, and the Council had long since decided that compromise was easier than adaptation. The chamber itself, the verdict hall, was vast enough to contain a small moon. Its ceiling was a rotating field of captured starlight, shifting slowly to reflect current galactic tensions, red for conflict zones, blue for treaties, fractured white for unresolved disputes that threatened collapse. Every flicker above was a war somewhere below. Delegates arrived in forms that defied simplicity. The Vorn Dominion manifested as towering biocrystalline structures. their thoughts rippling across shared neural lattices that hummed like restrained storms. The ethereal compact existed as drifting constellations of light, bound by quantum consensus. Even the Terran colonies, humanity's scattered branches, were represented here, though Earth itself remained conspicuously absent from most physical proceedings. And yet humanity was present in another way, always present, in the margins of every negotiation, in the statistical outliers of every conflict prediction, in the unexplained deviations that kept appearing in Council war models like ghosts refusing to be erased. At the center of it all stood the verdict sphere, a colossal construct of rotating geometric logic. It hovered above the chamber floor like a silent god of calculation. It did not judge. It computed judgment. Every decision made within its influence was filtered through billions of predictive layers, military outcome trees, socio-political collapse forecasts, extinction probability matrices. It was said that nothing in its sight could remain uncertain for long. Nothing except, increasingly, Earth. That morning, if time could still be said to function meaningfully in the spire, delegations arrived earlier than required. Not out of eagerness, but unease. Fleet formations outside the station adjusted without orders, tightening their orbits like predators sensing unseen movement. Entire armadas paused mid-transit, waiting for instructions that did not come. Because Earth had entered the chamber, not as a fleet, not as a display of force, but as a single human envoy. Captain Elias Mercer, no escort carriers, no defensive formations shadowing his approach, no visible augmentation beyond the standard diplomatic neural interface embedded discreetly behind his ear. He walked through the council gates as if he had not read the unspoken rule etched into every species doctrine. Never enter the verdict hall without something that can end it. Mercer ignored the stares. He always did. But what unsettled the chamber was not his presence. It was the absence around him. No fleet signatures waited in orbit. No hidden response protocols activated as he crossed security thresholds. Even the Council's automated threat systems, those ancient paranoid guardians buried beneath diplomatic protocol, registered him as something worse than dangerous. They registered him as unclassified, which, in a place like the Galactic Council spire, was indistinguishable from impossible. And still he stepped forward alone, past the rotating fields of judgment, beneath the watching gaze of 1,000 civilizations, toward the center of the verdict sphere where reality itself seemed to hold its breath, unarmed, unshielded, unafraid, as if whatever Earth had brought to this summit did not need to arrive with him to be present. The moment the laughter faded, the chamber did not return to silence. It tightened, like a living organism realizing something inside it had just moved in a way it did not understand. At first it was subtle, barely measurable. A delay in response cycles, a fraction of a second where translation matrices failed to agree on emotional classification. Then another. Then another. Across the Galactic Council spire, systems designed to anticipate conflict began to hesitate in ways they had never been programmed to tolerate. And in that hesitation, pressure formed. Every delegate felt it differently. The Vorn Dominion's crystalline bodies began to vibrate at frequencies outside their harmonic stability range, a sign of rising internal alarm. The ethereal compact's light forms dimmed slightly, as if their collective awareness had been pulled inward for recalibration. Even human representatives stationed in peripheral observation rings felt it, an instinctive tightening in the chest, a primal awareness that something in the room had stopped obeying familiar rules. It wasn't fear yet. It was pre-fear, the kind that arrives when reality starts behaving incorrectly, but not enough to prove it. At the center of the chamber, beneath the immense verdict sphere, Captain Elias Mercer remained still. His expression had not changed since the laugh. If anything, he looked calmer now, like someone who had already seen the reaction and was simply waiting for the galaxy to catch up. That calmness disturbed the room more than the anomaly itself. A Vorn War adjudicator finally broke protocol. Human, it transmitted, its voice splitting into layered harmonic aggression. Define the origin of that auditory disruption. Mercer blinked once, slowly. It was a joke, he said. The translation system paused before rendering the phrase, not because it was unclear, but because it could not find a historical precedent for it being harmless. Across the chamber, security subroutines began escalating without authorization. Not alarms, something more dangerous. Reassessment loops. Systems attempting to redefine what constituted a threat when no aggressive input had been detected. Outside the spire, fleets responded without command. Weapons powered up halfway, then stopped. Targeting arrays locked, then unlocked. Entire battle groups entered recursive hesitation states, unable to determine whether they had just been provoked or simply observed. And still, the laughter lingered in memory buffers like a contaminant, because no one could classify it. Not weapon, not diplomacy, not signal, just human. The verdict sphere reacted next. Slowly at first, barely perceptible rotation shifts within its geometric core, then faster. Its outer rings began cycling through probability models that had not been active in recorded history. Entire prediction branches collapsed mid-calculation, replaced by blank outputs marked insufficient framework, a status that had never existed before. The chamber's lighting dimmed again, but not due to power loss. It was deliberate. Environmental systems adjusting to stabilize emotional output levels among delegates. A silent admission that something in the room was now affecting even the spire's attempt at neutrality. Mercer's gaze drifted upward. Not toward the sphere, beyond it, as if he could feel something pressing against the far side of reality itself. Listening. A counselor from the Helion Accord attempted to speak, but its voice fractured mid-sentence as its linguistic core struggled to maintain coherence under shifting contextual logic. This response pattern is not, it stopped. Because every species in the chamber had just realized the same thing. The laughter had not only been heard, it had been processed. And something far larger than any fleet, any empire, any known intelligence network, had responded to it. Not with words, not with action, but with attention. And in the Galactic Council spire, attention was the first stage of extinction. The verdict sphere did not activate. It noticed itself being watched. That was the first impossibility. A structure built to eliminate uncertainty had, for the briefest moment, become uncertain about its own state. Across its impossibly complex lattice of rotating geometric planes, something shifted. Subtle at first, like a thought trying to form in a mind too large to contain it. Then the light inside it changed. Not color, not intensity, behavior. Every prediction engine embedded within the sphere began running simultaneous recalculations of the same event, a single human laugh. It should have resolved instantly into a classification: emotional anomaly, benign disruption, harmless variance, and diplomatic decorum. Instead, each model returned a different answer. Then those answers began contradicting themselves, then rewriting each other, then collapsing. Within seconds, entire branches of galactic probability theory stopped functioning. And the sphere did something it had never done in recorded history. It hesitated. Across the chamber, delegates felt it as a physical pressure drop, as if the very concept of certainty had been removed from the air. Some staggered. Others instinctively recalibrated their internal stabilizers. A few simply froze, unable to reconcile the sensation with anything in their biological memory. Then the sphere spoke. Not aloud, not through speakers. Through every system it touched. Unclassified behavior detected. A pause. Too long for machine processing. Too short for hesitation. Then, reclassification in progress. The words should have been routine. Standard diagnostic language. But they weren't. Because the sphere had never needed to reclassify something it could not already define. Inside its core, reality modeling arrays began to fail in cascading sequence. Not due to damage. Due to contradiction. Every attempt to simulate the human subject, Captain Elias Mercer, resulted in recursive loops that expanded outward into systems far beyond the chamber itself. And then it escalated. Across the spire, every linked council archive simultaneously flagged the same anomaly, a historical absence. No first contact doctrine accounted for humor as a destabilizing variable. No war protocol accounted for non-aggressive unpredictability. No extinction model accounted for an entity whose behavior could not be predicted by observing outcomes. And yet Earth had just done something worse than violate protocol. It had introduced a variable that refused to remain constant. The sphere's inner rings began to rotate faster, then slower, then out of sync with each other. Gravity stabilizers flickered as the structure's mass distribution calculations became self-contradictory. For a brief moment, the chamber's lighting bent in unnatural geometry, casting shadows that did not align with any physical object present. Delegates looked up, not at Mercer, not at each other, at the sphere. Because something was happening that no one had ever been trained to witness. A system designed to judge civilizations was struggling to understand one individual's emotional output, and failing. Deep within the sphere's core intelligence lattice, a final diagnostic ran automatically, one never expected to be triggered. Does the subject follow physical law consistently across observed instances? The answer did not appear. Instead, the system returned something unprecedented. A blank field. Not zero, not error. Absence of definable result. And in that absence, every species in the chamber understood without translation, without communication, without permission. The sphere was no longer evaluating humanity. It was trying to determine whether humanity could be evaluated at all. The silence that followed was not absence. It was control loss disguised as stillness. Every system across the Galactic Council spire tried to move at once, and discovered with rising horror that movement required permission it could no longer confirm. Weapons outside the chamber initiated firing sequences that never reached execution. Fleet commanders issued override codes that dissolved mid-transmission, as if language itself had begun forgetting how to carry intent. And at the center of it all, Captain Elias Mercer stepped forward. Not quickly, not cautiously, just decisively enough that every alien instinct in the chamber interpreted it as a final statement rather than a gesture. The air around him felt heavier now, not physically but conceptually, as if the room itself had become aware that whatever happened next would redefine what safe meant in galactic law. Even the verdict sphere behind him dimmed its rotational glow, no longer projecting judgment so much as uncertainty. Mercer stopped beneath it, looked up, and spoke again. "You keep trying to classify us," he said quietly. "That's your mistake." The translation systems hesitated, then rendered it imperfectly as if reluctant to commit. Subject, humanity, resists definition. Across the chamber, panic began to evolve. Not emotional panic first, systemic panic. Because every predictive engine in the spire had reached the same impossible conclusion simultaneously. If humanity could not be classified, it could not be predicted. If it could not be predicted, it could not be contained. And if it could not be contained, then every safety doctrine ever written by every civilization that had ever feared extinction was already obsolete. Outside the transparent dome, entire fleets began to drift out of formation. Not retreating, not advancing, just losing coherence like coordinated thought collapsing into instinct. Some ships attempted to lock weapons on Earth's diplomatic vessel, but found no targeting solution that didn't invalidate itself within microseconds. Others simply went dark, not destroyed, refusing signal integrity. Inside the chamber, a Vorn Dominion war adjudicator raised its internal energy field instinctively, only to find its systems rejecting activation authorization. Its own body refused its command. That was when the realization fully crystallized across the room. It was not Earth disabling them. It was their own systems refusing to engage Earth as a valid enemy parameter. Mercer's gaze shifted slowly across the chamber. "I didn't come here with an army," he said, a pause. Long enough for entire civilizations to calculate worst-case scenarios and find none that resolved cleanly. Because we don't deploy force when observation is enough. Something in that sentence triggered the sphere again. Not activation. Reaction. Its internal lattice briefly attempted to simulate human decision-making processes at scale. The result was catastrophic. Every model collapsed into the same recursive endpoint. A system attempting to predict a mind that changed its own predictive rules in real time. Across Council archives, ancient failsafes began surfacing. Protocols written in eras when civilizations still believed war was the highest form of intelligence. Those protocols attempted to initiate emergency containment procedures. They failed, not due to resistance, but because there was nothing left to apply them to. The concept of threat itself was dissolving in the presence of an intelligence that refused to behave like one. Mercer exhaled slowly, and for the first time since the laughter, he looked almost tired. Now, he said softly. You understand why we don't bring armies to peace summits. Behind him, the verdict sphere stopped rotating completely. Not shut down, not destroyed, just waiting, as if it had finally realized the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was not what humanity would do next, but what it had already done. By simply being observed, the Galactic Council spire did not explode. It did not collapse. It did not fall victim to war, rebellion, or any force the galaxy had ever known how to name. Instead, it faded, not visually at first, not in any way the eye could immediately confirm. The structure remained, towering rings of light and gravitic architecture suspended above the Orion nexus, fleet still frozen in unstable orbit around it, weapons still half-primed, command systems still screaming for authorization that no longer meant anything. And then slowly something changed. Data stopped agreeing with itself. Across every fleet, every sensor array, every diplomatic relay, the spire began to lose consistency. Its edges, once sharply defined against space, started to blur in contradictory readings. Optical systems reported structure. Gravitational systems reported partial absence. Quantum trackers refused to agree on whether it was even still there in any stable sense. It was not destruction. It was de-definition. Inside the chamber, reality itself felt thinner. Delegates remained in place, frozen not by command, but by confusion so deep it bordered on existential paralysis. Some attempted to speak. Their voices either failed to propagate or arrived distorted, as if passing through layers of interpretation that no longer matched their origin. The verdict sphere, once the immutable heart of galactic judgment, hung motionless above the chamber floor. Not broken, not powered down, just unresolved. Its geometric rings no longer rotated in harmony. They rotated in disagreement, each axis attempting to assert a different version of reality. And for the first time since its creation, the sphere was no longer producing verdicts. It was asking questions it could not answer. Captain Elias Mercer stood alone beneath it. Still human, still calm, still impossibly ordinary in a place that had just lost its understanding of ordinary. He did not look victorious. He did not look surprised. He looked like someone who had expected this outcome long before anyone else had thought to fear it. We're not your enemy, he said softly. The words translated imperfectly across collapsing linguistic systems. Some species heard agreement. Others heard warning. Others heard something worse, something their own languages had never been designed to carry. Irrelevance. Outside the spire, fleets began to drift apart. Not in retreat, in disconnection. Command structures failed not because they were attacked, but because the shared assumption that they were participating in a unified moment of reality no longer held. Entire armadas simply stopped coordinating. Weapons systems powered down as if the concept of firing had become an abstract thought with no physical anchor. And then it became clear. The darkness was not spreading. It was revealing absence. Every system that had ever defined the Galactic Council as an authority was now encountering something it could not reconcile. A central institution that no longer registered as universally real. Inside the chamber, lights dimmed again, not from power loss but from interpretive collapse. Illumination required agreement on what was being illuminated. And agreement was failing. Mercer finally looked up at the verdict sphere. Not with defiance, not with awe, but with something closer to farewell. You built your peace on things you could measure, he said. A pause. Long enough for the galaxy itself to feel like it was holding its breath. We don't. And somewhere far beyond the spire, beyond fleets and treaties and the fragile mathematics of empire, humanity's presence persisted, not as a command, not as a threat, but as a constant the universe could no longer reduce. The Galactic Council did not fall that day. It simply stopped being the thing that decided what reality meant. And in the silence that followed, Earth remained exactly as it had always been, unarmed, unbothered, and finally understood.